Hello everyone, welcome to the first episode of Story Analysis, Turn Back Time Mage. The title of this game is Cris Tales, developed by Modus and Sick Games, and this analysis is being done by yours truly, Gogo Genmu. Have you ever played a story-driven video game and found it to be an incredibly immersive, engaging experience? Where we're not just seeing the story unfold, we're connecting with the characters in ways that make us feel some type of way. On the other hand, have you ever had an empty feeling after playing a game with a story you simply could care less about? No matter if the gameplay was good or annoying, we sometimes wish the story being told would somehow tie the whole interactive experience together in an impactful way. A good story has essential elements that create a compelling narrative. If the writer or developer of a story-driven game wants the player to care about the story, the 5 commandments of storytelling must be present. Developed by Sean Cohen, author of the Story Grid, these 5 commandments are the inciting incident, the turning point, the crisis, the climax, and the resolution. These commandments guide the structure of a story, ensuring it captivates and resonates with its audience. So with that being said, let's see if the story of Cris Tales follows the 5 commandments of storytelling. Commandment number 1, does the story have an inciting incident? The inciting incident is important because it sets up the rest of the story. In the world of Cris Tales, Cris Bell is living life as usual, pruning flowers as directed by her mother superior, until something happens to upset her life's balance. This, in turn, makes Cris Bell want to set out to achieve a goal. In this case, Cris Bell wants to use her time powers to protect her hometown Nareem and the people she cares about from the unexpected goblin attack. This scenario makes this inciting incident fall into the category of coincidental instead of casual because no active choice of Cris Bell's was involved to cause the attack. Now, if you were wondering, wouldn't the inciting incident be when the strange frog took Cris Bell's rolls to the cathedral where she receives her time powers? Well, you would be correct if we were referring to one of the story's beats. The beat is the smallest component of a story and is an identifiable moment of change. While the 5 commandments can be applied to every beat, scene, sequence, act, and subplot, please stay with me while I explain why the global inciting incident is when the goblins attack Nareem. There are 4 rules of the global inciting incident. Rule number 1, genre conventions. Each genre has a certain requirement and expectation that must be present to move the plot forward. Cris Tales is an action story, so it must begin with an attack or a threat of death. The Volcano Sisters' assault on Nareem is one of the obligatory moments of an action genre and is an expected event that causes conflict. Rule number 2, the inciting incident must create imbalance. The imbalance has to be big enough for Cris Bell to want to restore peace and balance in her world. Keep in mind that Cris Bell is under the impression that her hometown being burned down by goblins will not only cause harm to her people, but will also cause ash blight to spread throughout the town and rot everyone's homes. Thus, Cris Bell seeks the aid of another time mage so she can protect the people she cares about. Rule number 3, the inciting incident must have invisible elements. There has to be something Cris Bell underestimates or doesn't understand fully. To restore balance, she must change herself and her surroundings to find out the following. Why are goblins attacking her town in the first place? Simply fending off the attackers isn't enough. Also, who are the Volcano Sisters? What are they plotting? And who do they work for? And why is Secretary Lana quick to blame Cris Bell and her friends for setting the town ablaze? To find out these invisible elements, Cris Bell must leave the town of Nareem to escape imprisonment and get stronger to fight back. Rule number 4, connection with the ending. The inciting incident must promise and connect the ending of the story with the beginning of the story. So we must ask the question, will discovering who's behind the goblin attack and putting a stop to their plans save her hometown? Knowing these rules of an inciting incident helps us quickly identify which event knocks our protagonist's life out of balance. Fortunately, it was placed immediately at the beginning of Cris Tales. The first instance is during the battle mechanics tutorial in the beginning of the game. The second time was while engaged in fighting the Volcano Sisters with an ally. After fending off the attackers and escaping Narim, Cris tries to find a way to make everything go back the way she thinks is normal. Protecting everyone becomes the object of desire. This response leads us to commandment number 2, the turning point. The turning point is important because it connects the player to the protagonist. The concept of the turning point is basically the moment the protagonist is pushed to their limit after many attempts to bring things back to normal, with each attempt failing due to how increasingly complicated things get as the story progresses. In Cris Tales, the goblins' attack on Narim is a bigger problem than Cris and her crew had anticipated. The more they try to fix things, the more progressive the complications get. Something keeps getting in the way. Either someone does something to cause Cris efforts to fail, or new info forces her to change and do something different. And this is called progressive complications. Now, in order for a story to feel impactful, progressive complications must be present. There are 4 rules for progressive complications. Rule number 1. The stakes must increase. Cris must struggle with each increasingly stressful conflict level until the point of no return is reached. Rule number 2. Choices made must grow in irreversibility. Each decision must become harder to reverse until forced into a crisis situation. Rule number 3. Complications must connect to the inciting incident. The narrative must force Cris to deal with the main issue at hand. Rule number 4. Complications must exhaust all efforts and resources from each plan Cris has attempted, thus pushing her into a situation that forces her to change. Cris and her friends must travel to each town's cathedral to gain more power. Narim already received the first dose, easy clap. St. Clarity, where the Time Empress can literally delete people from time. Tuluria, there we find out the Time Empress would trigger a cataclysm at the Rainbow Lake. The cataclysm is caused by each individual ruin explodes and nearby towns are destroyed. And Cinder, where we find out the Time Empress is secretly building an army at the citizens' expense. And at Crystallis, where Cris confronts and defeats the Time Empress, but it is at the Rainbow Lake when she finds out that she didn't stop the cataclysm. The frog Matthias sends her back in time so she can prevent the Renner ruins from exploding. Now Cris has a new goal: to stop the cataclysm, collect the keys, and deactivate the self-destruct sequences of the terminals. She has to go to Tuluria, Narim, St. Clarity, Cinder, and Crystallis to do this. The second attempt at stopping the Time Empress is the revelatory turning point. Cris is now afforded the opportunity to defeat the Time Empress and stop her plans. In that moment, Matthias reveals himself to be Ardo, the last of the Renner race. We now get new information that Ardo is plotting to execute a planetary-scale time jump to bring the Renner race back from the past into the future. And we also find out that the Time Empress is actually Cris, but from another timeline. So, according to the Time Empress, each time a Time Mage tries to stop Ardo, they fail. Another one is born each time they try again. They've tried every strategy except the one that actually destroys the ruins and kills a bunch of people. Ardo, as Matthias, must have realized this and sent Cris back to stop her. So does this turning point have what it takes to create a story shift? Cris initial strategy after the inciting incident was to travel to each town to get stronger and protect her friends and her homeland from the Time Empress. Cris no longer has to protect everyone from the Time Empress, but now she must save the world from Ardo's time jump. Now she can't simply confront Ardo straight up, because Ardo's barrier is stopping them from confronting him. The strategy is to travel to each Renner ruin to deactivate Ardo's barrier. I'm not sure if it was annoying to any other players out there, but for me, I definitely did not enjoy that part. Story-wise, I think that event was a great idea, but gameplay-wise, it got repetitive. Also of note, something about the turn of events was a little off, as I couldn't help but feel more empathy towards the witness's struggles than Cris Bell's, even after she is faced with her ultimate dilemma, even after she's faced with Elena, who is the Mother Superior #1, and with Wilhelm, her maestro mentor, getting deleted. I don't know, maybe it's because Cris Bell didn't suffer enough, I'm not sure. But with that being said, this brings us to commandment number 3, the crisis. After the turning point, the crisis forces the protagonist to make a choice, change, and show their true intentions. In this game, you are able to make this choice as the player for Cris Bell. To help identify what this choice is, there are 2 rules the crisis must follow. Rule number 1, the choice options must be mutually exclusive. By choosing one, something must be given up in exchange. Having both is not an option. Rule number 2, the choices must matter. If the choice isn't difficult to make and irreversible, no one will care. Now, in Cris Tales, you are faced with the best bad choice. As Cris Bell, you confront Ardo and fight him. You can choose either option A, to sacrifice yourself. Cris Bell defeats Ardo. She sacrifices her life to safely allow over 3,000 years of time to jump to the present. If she doesn't, humanity's safety and their existence is at stake. Or option B, which is to sacrifice others. If beating Ardo for Cris Bell is too difficult, you could choose to give up, go back in time to become the person that she hates, and finish what the Time Empress could not. Both of these are negative options. Which choice is the best bad choice? After making a choice, we are flung into the next commandment, commandment number 4. The climax is when the protagonist decides to act on their dilemma in the crisis. Here is where we get to see how the choice pans out. For an impactful climax, there are just 2 rules it must follow. Rule number 1, we must actually see the protagonist make their choice. It can't happen off screen. And rule number 2, the choice must be made by the protagonist and the protagonist alone. Nobody else can make this choice for them. Both choices lead to Cris Bell's desire to protect the world, whether it's through sacrificing herself or the sacrifice of her integrity, along with a few thousand civilians, of course. Finally, we've reached the commandment number 5, the resolution. Now, the resolution shows us the aftermath of the climax. It's where we get to see if the protagonist has made the right decision or not. So, with option A, the Rena can go be Rena and humanity will continue to exist on separate parallel worlds. Both can rebuild into a new era. Upon Cris Bell's sacrifice, she will be missed, but is also revered as a hero who saved the world. Now with option B, we get to see Rollo or Wilhelm again. The rest is left up to the imagination, I guess. So for me personally, I think option A would be the most optimal choice because it has a bigger payoff. It resolves the inciting incident, it shows more of what happens after the choice is made, and also this choice resolves the open storylines in each kingdom. So in closing, did Cris Tales obey the 5 commandments? Yes. There was an inciting incident, there was a turning point, and progressive complications along the way. There was a crisis, there was also a climax, and there was a resolution. I give it a 4.5. It lost half points on the turning point because it is here where we should feel more connected to Cris Bell. And for some reason, for me at least, I cared about almost everyone except for Cris Bell. So the overall messages of Cris Tales are: life is preserved when Cris Bell makes the sacrifice to persuade Ardo to accept her support in making the time jump. Cris Bell also gains wisdom when sharing her gifts with an imperfect world. And life is also preserved when we find and follow our true life's purpose. So that concludes the Cris Tales story analysis. Once again, I am Gogo Genmu, and let's go play another story. Bye.